Hey, it's Ollie, and we are now right at the beginning of my new project to learn to read and write Chinese characters. In the first video, if you've seen that, I introduced a little bit about the rationale behind this, why I am learning to read and write Chinese, even though Cantonese is the language that I'm actually learning. So go back and watch that if you haven't. What we're going to be doing in this video is talking a little bit about strategy, how to go about learning characters, because if you have ever thought about learning to read and write Chinese before, maybe you are right now, or maybe you already can, whatever your situation, you will have thought about the best way to go about it. Now, it's one of these contentious things, like everybody you speak to has got a different method. There are people that say, use this method, use that method, learn to do this, you go crazy with it. There's far too much. And I've taken some advice from some people that I know and respect, but ultimately I've kind of made the decision that the only way forward is for me to figure out what works for me and the best way for me to go about it. I'm probably going to make some mistakes, but that's cool. I'm going to talk about it very openly and honestly here, let you know what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and the lessons that I've learned. So, how am I going to go about it? Well, as I mentioned in the previous video, the language I'm learning is Cantonese, and for the most part, Cantonese is not written down. What people from Hong Kong do when they read and write is they read and write traditional Mandarin Chinese, for the most part. So I want to have the same kind of foundational educational literacy that a person from Hong Kong does, which means I need to be able to read and write Chinese. This is also going to serve me very well in the future for whatever else I do. Being able to read and write Chinese is a life goal that I have that I'd like to be able to do. So how am I going to go about it? One of the big problems is that all of the materials that are available for learning to read and write Chinese are focused on Mandarin. And that means that anything that involves pronunciation, so that means learning to not only to read and write the characters, but also how to pronounce the characters, is going to be problematic for me because the pronunciation in Mandarin is not the same as in Cantonese. So that was my first decision. It was, okay, I need to find a method that's not going to insist on me actually saying and pronouncing the characters. That led me very nicely to this, the well-known Heisig method that began in Japanese with a very well-known book called Remembering the Kanji, and then has been adjusted to this, which is Remembering the Hanzi, and this in this case is traditional Hanzi. Now, the main point about this method is that they take an approach of teaching you individual characters out of context and teaching you what the core meaning of those characters is. Now this is, and they don't teach you the pronunciation. There's no pronunciation involved. You're simply going through, and in this book you will learn 1,500 characters. You'll learn to read and write them, and you'll learn the core meaning of them. Now, a number of disadvantages to this approach, primarily that you don't learn words, because a lot of Chinese words come in two, or even, mostly in two, or one or two. And so with this book, you're not really learning words, you're learning the kind of core meaning of the characters. Potential disadvantage number one. Potential disadvantage number two is that a lot of these characters actually aren't used on their own. So you might learn one of these, if you take a character that you learn in this book, show it to someone from Hong Kong, they're like, I never used that. Potential disadvantage number two. Potential disadvantage number three is that there's no pronunciation, so I'm going to learn these characters and not going to know how to say them. So on the face of it, quite a few potential disadvantages. However, having looked around, I'm convinced that this is the right methodology for me, and I'm going to tell you why. Learning Chinese characters is a huge task. It's massive. You've got thousands and thousands of characters to learn, and then you've got to put them in words. Later on, you then got to learn how to pronounce them. It's a massive task. As tasks come in the world of language learning, this is pretty high up on the list in terms of difficulty, right? What that means is you have to break it down, and you have to break it down into more manageable chunks so that you're not overwhelmed. I get overwhelmed easily by tasks, like, if I'm trying to read or write something that's where there's too much I don't understand, I get overwhelmed easily and I give up. I like to take on tasks that are bite-sized, easy to understand and comprehend, and that you can complete, thereby getting this feeling of progress, and that's what's most important. Now, the Heisig method is put together by him, and in this case his partner Richardson. They introduce characters in a very particular order, which is subjective. It is always going to be subjective, but they have done it based on frequency lists and based on the kind of subjective usefulness or even objective usefulness of the characters. Doesn't matter. I don't really think this matters, because the main benefit of this approach is that when I get to the end of the book, I'm gonna know 1,500 characters, and I'm gonna know them fairly well. Those characters by themselves aren't going to be that much use, but because I know them and I can read and write them, the next step then to go on to actually see them in context and to be able to recognize them within words is going to be much, much smaller and much more achievable. So I'm kind of banking on the fact that by going through this and by learning to read, write, recognize 1,500 characters, the next step then to actually using words in context and actually being able to read things is going to be much more manageable and far better, I think, than the alternative, which is to start off with texts of which I understand nothing and then have to kind of pick out characters to learn in a very kind of haphazard way. So I'm a fan of structure, I'm a fan of defining tasks, and for me this does a very, very good job of that. So I am going to use this book, and my goal is very simple. I'm going to go through this book and I'm going to learn 1,500 traditional Chinese characters, the reading, the writing, and the meaning. And I'm going to give myself 3 months to do it. So by the end of November, I plan to learn 1,500 characters. In the next video, I'm going to go into a bit more detail about how the system works, but that's kind of planting a flag here. This is what I'm going to be using. It's what I think has got the best chance of success for me. That's it. See you in the next video.